Thank you for joining us with what will be our second speaker event with our wonderful archivist in residence, Lori Kuechler. So thank you, Lori, for coming with us tonight. If you're not aware, Lori has been our archivist in residence for almost 3 years now, and has helped us a great deal with digging through our stacks of files, photos, and books to help us organize and preserve our history. During this presentation, if you have any questions for Lori, please feel free to type them in the question and answer field, the Q&A field that you see at the bottom of the screen, as Lori will be answering questions towards the end of this webinar. So with that, I know you have all joined us tonight, not to hear me talk, because you do hear me talk quite a bit, but not to hear me talk, but to listen to Lori and all the interesting history she has found about the University Club and our former members. So with that, I'd like to once again introduce you to all to Lori Kuechler, and I'm going to turn it over to her.
Thank you, Shelley. I'm going to let you know that I have a happy family living in my house. I've got a 15-year-old grandchild who is playing in the other room because his daddy brought home a slide for him. So every now and then you're going to hear screaming. I promise it's not bad screaming, it's good screaming. So anyway, I thank you for having me here tonight. I really enjoyed the last time that we talked about the history of the University Club. And part of what I'm discovering is there's just an incredible wealth of personalities in the history of this club, that incredible people who accomplished a lot and really set the tone for the club as we know it right now. So I'm going to go ahead and get started, but I want to let you know that it's going to be a little bit of reading here and there, because I decided I wanted their voices to come through instead of me interpreting them for you. I tend to like primary documents. I like the documents that actually speak to me from the past. I don't always want someone to interpret them for me. And so if you feel the same way, you'll probably enjoy some of this thing. There's going to be one reading from one of our early presidents that is quite poignant, and I just couldn't say it any better than that person could. So I'm going to go ahead and share screen now. The unique and early commitments of the founders of the University Club for about the first 15 years were pretty extraordinary. Okay, looks good. Thank you, everybody. Good. We're pretty extraordinary people. They came to Portland for all kinds of reasons, and we will get into that soon. But let's go ahead and take a look at what might have been the social need for a university club in Portland, because the founders were very motivated to have this club. And it's important for us to think about why they did. And it's particularly important for us to perhaps realize that there is a great deal in common with the members of the past as the members in the present. The alma maters of these early founders were Yale, Amherst, Harvard, Virginia, MIT, Annapolis, Berkeley, Oregon University. Some of these names might seem different to you because they were different before. If you look through that list, you see that it's basically the kind of colleges that people have a pretty hard time getting into nowadays anyway. And back then it wasn't that different. They were all men, and they rarely came originally from Portland. It was unusual. They often married into Portland families, but rarely did any of our founders come from Portland. They typically came from Boston, New York, and various places on the East Coast. And when they came to Portland, I can't help but think that there wasn't a tremendous amount of culture shock, because Portland at that point in time was when they were forming these ideas to form this club, Portland was about 20,000, 25,000 people. So and lots of stumps and lots of wood buildings and wood sidewalks and muddy streets. And it was not Cambridge by any stretch of the imagination. And so they missed the environments that they were accustomed to, that they loved dearly. And they also missed a certain amount of camaraderie and fellowship. And so the Articles of Incorporation occurred in 1900. And my cat is jumping. Hang on a minute. Oh, kitty. All right. That's true, by the way. Anyway, the Articles of Incorporation were established in the year 1900. And if you notice in Article 2, the object of this corporation shall be the intellectual and social welfare of college men in Portland and the vicinity. It wasn't necessarily an egotistical need, in my opinion. It was an actual need for a certain fellowship that they remembered that was important to them. And they wanted, in fact, to continue and bring to Portland. Unfortunately, there were only a few people from Harvard, a few people from Yale, a few people from MIT. And so instead of having a Harvard club or a Yale club, they formed the university club so that they could enjoy the fellowship. And it was primarily an Ivy League, what we call an Ivy League group. And those colleges had similar curricula, had similar fraternal groups. And so it made a tremendous amount of sense for them to go ahead and form a club where they could all get together and share experience. But at the same time, all things considered, there was a certain amount of diversity, because if you think about it, those colleges were rivals. And so for them to decide to get together and share and fellowship, so to speak, that was a significant thing to do. I was raised in Pullman, Washington, and oftentimes found the fraternal activities to be really kind of annoying and a problem. But in the days that these gentlemen were in college, the fraternities were places. Often college was the first time they'd left their homes. It was their family. And so the founders of the University Club wanted to recreate that family experience that they had in their college education. So at first they just started getting together. They just started getting together in various places. And then until about 1900, they got together at Lefebvre. Someone who can speak French would manage that. I'm not. Anyway, on 5th between Stark and Oak. And they were there whenever it was available. And then later, they were upstairs at 6th and Alder, which is the image you're seeing right here on the screen. Was a well-known Richard's restaurant, very, very good restaurant in town, as a matter of fact. And they were able to get the upper room for $17.50 a month, as long as they ordered all their food from Richard. And so that was the arrangement, that was the understanding. And they were at 6th and Alder until they outgrew 6th and Alder. And they were all about of the same graduating ages, about the same generation, and began slowly to fill up that space and started accumulating money in the bank. Keep in mind, these are relatively successful business folks. And so they were able to accumulate their dues, accumulate the coffer, so to speak, and start looking toward the possibility of buying their own clubhouse, which they did. The Funder House was purchased and moved, actually relocated to 93 West Park Street, not far from where the club is right now. The addresses are different, so don't try to figure out where that is. And they were in the Funder House until the facility that the University Club is housed in at this time, in the on Jefferson. And so, oops, let's go back. So that's humor, that's historian humor there, Funder Fellowship. See there, see what I did there? anyway, when they were at the Funder House, they actually had lodging for people. So if they had friends who came from out of town, they could put them up in the Funder House. They had a kitchen. They had meals served, menus. It was quite nice. And they also had, finally, they created a hymnal. I don't know if you're familiar with important aspects of Ivy League schools, but there were songs, like, for example, later, I believe it's Cambridge, no, it's Yale, has the Whiffin' Poof song, is a famous Yale anthem. That was later after this, though, so you won't find the Whiffin' Poof song in this hymnal. But they put a conglomeration of all their little hymns and songs that they would sing, drinking songs they would sing together in the same Scotch-Irish tradition. And they would do this at the Funder House and enjoy each other's company, the camaraderie. They had reading clubs, they had philosophical clubs. There were times when they would all meet and talk about Plato. They'd all meet and talk about politics. They would gather and share ideas and stimulate their intellect, which was basically the idea, was to stimulate their intellect. And they started a library there as well. So the library tradition at University Club is a strong tradition. So here they are at the Funder House. Things are going along swimmingly, but they start to fill up. Portland is growing exponentially. More and more university people come to town. It's in the best interest of the club to continue to fill its ranks with members, and they're starting to approach numbers where people can no longer actually all attend at the same time at Funder House. And so they can't invite people in, they can't do much of anything. And so in about 1910 to 1911, James Kerr, the 13th president of the group, they changed presidents relatively often, and not on a routine basis, but when people would serve about a year back then. And what I would like to read to you is something that was written by James Kerr. We have our annual presidential addresses. And I'd like you to just kind of relax for a second and sit and listen to what James Kerr is saying. Basically, they've outgrown the Funder House. So here we are. He says, I have no doubt that when you become members of the club you anticipated, in some degree at least, the enjoyment of those same relationships which are found only to their full extent in our undergraduate years at college, something of that spirit of comradeship which comes from common interests, perhaps a temporary enjoyment of the luxurious feeling of irresponsibility, which you all remember. You also anticipated an opportunity for a relaxation from those intellectual exercises, which have a definite purpose, and an opportunity to indulge in those which may perhaps be described as aimless, and which, though merely mental gymnastics, are exceedingly enjoyable. In other words, you hope to find the University Club the opportunity for social intercourse with those whose education, training, and culture had been the same as your own, together with an opportunity for mental relaxation or mental exercise as you felt inclined, with those who had the capacity to be innocuous or astute as occasion suggested. I understand that in the early days of the club, these anticipations were largely realized by all of the members. The dinners were enlivened and made profitable by both wit and wisdom, and that the interest of all the members was maintained. During this period, the club was quartered in various halls and rooms about the city. It was long before my time, but if I may venture an opinion, I would say that this period of prosperity was largely due to the fact that the membership of the club was more homogeneous than it has become. The members were more nearly the same age and a very considerable degree enjoyed common tastes and were all essentially companionable. This condition is said to have continued for quite a while after the club commenced the occupancy of its present quarters, which is the Funder House. But after a time, a radical change took place in the personnel of membership. The purchase of the property was a wise move as a financial investment and makes possible now a reorganization and the establishment of the club on a broad and essential lines. But it must be admitted that for the past few years, the charter of the present quarters has been largely responsible for the suspension of interest on the part of considerable portion of the membership. This result has come about in this way. The membership of the club has gradually grown to a point where it is now much larger than can be well accommodated in the present quarters. The only facilities for social intercourse between the members have been those afforded by the cramped and insufficient quarters of this old house, and it has been manifestly impossible for the members of such different ages and differing tastes and interests to make the club their common meeting place, and the result has been that the club has been almost exclusively by younger members. This has been the fault of no one, but the necessary consequence of inadequate facilities. It's been recognized, therefore, on all sides that the future of the club depends on the adoption of some policy which will result in disposing of the club's property and providing new and commodious quarters which will meet the wants of all classes of members. Diligent effort has been made to realize the full value of the club's asset, to negotiate the purchase of a suitable site for the erection of a proper club building, and to devise a working plan which would provide the necessary funds to accomplish the desired result. The Arlington Club is purely a social organization. The commercial club, while attempting some social features, is essentially a businessman's club and has for its object the encouragement and advancement of business and commerce. The University Club, on the other hand, and this is what I want to get to here. The University Club, on the other hand, is incorporated under the laws of Oregon as a literary and educational society. And it would seem, to some degree at least, it ought to exercise some of the powers conferred upon it by the state. The criticism has been too often made, and justly, that the university men of the country in every community, while themselves conceding that they're best fitted by natural ability and training to take an active part in the affairs of the city and state, constitute the one body of men as a class who take no part in such matters whatsoever. It may be said that this situation is irredeemable, but if it is desirable that Portland should be one of the communities to prove an exception to the rule, some organization is necessary. I have no intention of suggesting that the University Club should be in any way or sense be a political organization, but I do believe that under proper conditions, such a club could be made a center from which the influence of its members as individuals could be made a power for good in such movements as are and should be underway for a city beautiful municipal reform and the building up of our state institutions and learning. These and countless other movements are and will be in the hands of the booster and the live wire, the man who acts without thinking. Then they should be in the hands of the man who can and will both think and act. The University Club should and can combine a pleasure of profit, relaxation and effort, and can be an influence for great good. It can supply a want, which is felt in Portland, namely a place of reception for visitors who represent the best thought of the East and who would be out of place at a booster banquet at the Commercial Club. By the dinner given to Governor Wilson, the club recognized its opportunity in this respect, and for one evening in the year, membership in a club was at a premium. Then too, serious addresses by persons of less than national reputation are always listened to by the members with interest and advantage. Such affairs as these have been uniformly successful, but the present cramped quarters and the lack of continuous interest have made it difficult to accomplish a great deal in this direction under existing conditions. While this whole picture of what may be brought about is perhaps nothing but a dream, but that is what your opinion is to be asked upon this evening. If some such thing is possible, it is believed to be essential that the club erect a commodious building, dignified in appearance, which will not only afford the space necessary to satisfy the various tastes of its member, but which will also have that outward appearance, which will give it a standing as one of the institutions of the city. To the mind of the speaker, both of these things are necessary. With these ideas in mind, the quest was carried on for a suitable site. A site at the very heart of the business district is obviously out of the question because of the prohibitive expenses. A site at least as large as a quarter block was deemed essential to the erection of the building, of the distinctive character required, and as convenient a location as close proximity to the business district as our financial limitations could permit was sought. After diligent investigation, a tentative selection was made of the property known as the Julia Corbett Homestead at the northwest corner of 6th and Jefferson, 150 feet on Jefferson and 100 feet on 6th. An opinion has been taken on this property at a price of $75,000, with the idea that if desired, the quarter block can be retained and one lot fronting on Jefferson can be disposed of as a substantial figure. So of course the letter goes on, and this was his address. And I think you probably know by the photograph here what the result of his, oh, University of Utah. Yes, Sue, University of Utah. What the result of his address was that it was overwhelming that people wanted to move. There were tremendous opportunities within the membership because several of the members were accomplished architects, developers, bankers, utilities, executives. It was a perfect storm for the club to have things like electricity and telephones and all of the stuff that was state of the art. And so here we have, as a result of this conversation and a commitment to wanting to have a place that was an intellectual hub in the city, this was the result. Whoa, what happened? Oh, whoa, 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 whoa. How'd that happen? Hang on a minute, we're moving. I don't know why that did that. Bear with me. Okay, we'll just do that. Oh, I hit the end toggle, not the there. So let's get back to before that address, before the club. What were the kinds of people? Why is it that that address, talking about the intellectual health of men who had immigrated literally from Ivy League cultures and a world of higher education, what is it that made his message resonate to the point that these people would go to great lengths to produce an extraordinarily different clubhouse than the one that they had before? So the first president in 1897 and 99, laying the foundation for where they ended up in 1912. Our first president was William Whidden, and some of you might know who William Whidden is. It was William Whidden, and he was born in Massachusetts, and he was the son of a contractor, and he attended MIT, where he received a degree in 1877. He then went and spent 4 years in Paris studying architecture, and upon his return to the United States, he found employment in New York City and the prominent firm of McKim, Mead and White. So this, I turn to him as a founding example because one of the things that's an extremely common thread with our founders is they are very much educated in the liberal arts, and a good number of them are in fact architectures. We thought that they were, I thought at first they were developers in the sense that they were bankers and business people. There were that as well, but most of those folks went to Arlington. In the case of the University Club, these primarily were artists within the development community, one of which was Whidden. And he was an extremely significant architect. Responsible for the design of dozens of buildings throughout the Portland area. I didn't put him on the slide here, but he was the architect for the Portland Hotel, which was is no longer in place. The Gilbert Building, the Hamilton Building, the Postal Building, and they're all on the Register of Historic Places. The Portland's Failing Building, the Corbett Building, the Imperial Hotel, Wilcox Building, Stevens Building. And a lot of public organizations, such as the old public library, the Portland City Hall, Multnomah County Courthouse, were all designed by Wooden. Friendly Hall and the campus of U of O, Carnegie Hall on Pacific University, Arlington Club building, which was then demolished later and replaced, was all done by Wooden. And also, if you were to do a Southwest Portland tour, Wooden designed several of the houses on the hill, and is an extreme contributor to the kind of architecture in homes in the Portland area. So this is one of our founders. So the message of President Kerr landed on fertile ears when it landed on the minds of people who were artists and business people. Our second president, as another example, William Brewster, extraordinary, I would say, prodigy. This is him, you know, very young in his accomplishments early in life, went to Amherst, Wesleyan. He was 32 when the UC was founded, and by the end he had his own law firm. This is his law firm picture. And he served as a president, treasurer, vice president, secretary, off and on, throughout the first 2 decades of the club. He was extremely involved, and he was president off and on as well. And but was extremely involved in a variety of civic entities before moving on to being a lawyer, and was very much involved in the civic life of the club. This is him in an older picture. That's him up on the upper right. He was 1 term city council. He was a commissioner of public affairs, established major improvements to Portland, including lighting, sidewalks, recreational equipment, and in the parks, and very much involved in the University Club as well. Involved in the establishment of the Arts Commission, and longest surviving UC member, passed away in 1949. He was involved in the public library situation, and basically almost single-handedly made it so that we had a public library way before lots of other cities did. He founded the library group. What's interesting here is you go down to the 3rd bullet point. These are the citizens that LAP, the library, public library, were leading citizens, including UC members William Ladd, Frederick Strong, Henry Corbett, Henry Failing, and C.H. Lewis. They were all the directors of the board for the public library program. And so not only were the original members of the club engaged in their own intellectual development, they were involved in the intellectual development of the entire city. So once again, Kerr's address was given to these men who were already doing these things. So you can probably see that the address was not only offering what needed to be heard, but it was also a reinforcement of what was already happening. And eventually the library ended up being free after all of the work that this group put together, combining donated amounts of books by various families and public policy changes by having someone like Wooden on the board. Oh, thank you, Dean. Yeah. Platt brothers outlived Wooden. Harrison Platt died in 51. Platt, sorry. Yeah, I get different information, but I believe you. It's a little tricky. I'm trying to go ahead and create a a better list of information for our early members. Beginning in 1912, the University Club expanded its activities beyond the scope of the fraternal fellowship, holding multiple lectures on an annual basis and integrating families, women, and women's interests into the day-to-day activities of the club. So not only was the club involved in expanding the minds of its own memberships and retaining the knowledge that they'd learned and involved in fellowship, one of the unique differences that is a characteristic of the University Club is I've read almost all of the board and documents of the first maybe 40 years of the club. And one of the things that strikes me over and over again is the extent to which this organization pulled in families, wives, children, and I must say that is not typical of university clubs for their alma mater. That's not typical of what was being done at Harvard Club and Yale Club. So they had not only a unique situation where they had a fraternal-ish experience, but they also decided that the camaraderie that came from their families coming together for events, for parties, for dances, for lectures was also significant to them. And one of the things that probably contributed to that is the wives of many of these men were long-term Portland pioneer granddaughters. And so they had a certain authority already in place. And so it would not have made any sense whatsoever to excluded the wives of these gentlemen, because they were the artisans and the culture keepers throughout the 1800s as it is. They were the people who brought in the first accordions, who brought in the first art, who formed civic clubs, who were the culture keepers. And so it made a tremendous amount of sense, considering the mission of the University Club, to integrate women into their activities. Now, there is, of course, the limitations that we're aware of, but that integration of families makes a tremendous amount of sense based upon what I'm reading in the documents. In 1918, I bring this in because this is another example of a certain kind of emphasis that is unique to the University Club. Andrew Hall was a beloved member for decades as well. And there are some records of his letters during World War I that are at the Oregon Historical Society archives. And this is an image of one of them. But this is a letter from a club member coming back. And by the way, during World War I, 25% of the membership was serving in the war. And so the club took a pretty hard hit, especially with their new investment of the clubhouse. So it was a tough time. We went into that last time. All war is horrible, but it's good to remember it's only a passing phase. The world will go on. The barbarians can destroy Belgium, lay waste to France, and violate every instinct of decency and order. But poetry and art and beauty will live and flourish in spite of all their efforts. I think this is another poignant example of what it is that the University Club brought to Dr. Hall's mind when he was off somewhere else, is that the priority of beauty and art and poetry and literature and philosophy and thinking about why we do things, not just what we do, is an aspect of the founders of this club that I like emphasizing at times, because yes, of course, they were extraordinarily financially successful people. And basically not only the founders of the club, but the founders of Portland itself. At the same time, they had a set of priorities that were unique, and the University Club is the place where they brought those priorities to light. An example of this is the integration of families and culture into the club itself, is the fact that that entire annex at the bottom of the University Club has always been was always the ladies' annex until women were integrated fully into the club. And that was even soft as well, because women wanted to continue their activities. This is a membership book where women were kept track of and could adhere to the rules and could pay dues if their spouses passed. They could stay involved if their spouses passed away. And then eventually women were allowed to join the Women's Auxiliary. They were not allowed to be regular members of the club, but women who achieved a certain educational levels, by the time we got to the 20s and 30s, they were allowed to join the Women's Auxiliary, even if they didn't have a male family member in the regular club. So there was a parallel club that was extremely active, particularly during World War I and the Depression. And there was a little more politics going on in the women's annex or the ladies' annex than there was in the men's side, because they were involved in, for example, the war effort. They sent packages to soldiers full of boots, blankets, rations, and whatever was needed on the front. They also worked creating food baskets, worked some of the local churches. And during the Depression era, they offered opportunities for food to be picked up, a pantry, so to speak. And so, but one of the things that we're going to talk about probably next time is how the Ladies Auxiliary and how the women of the club are the ones who were the intellectual lead for pulling in lecturers as time went on. And so they managed, they didn't have any authority whatsoever, but they did have a male member overseer of their activities, and who pretty much never said no when they were able to get guests to come in and speak and offer lectures. And so there's an incredible list of, it's basically a who's who of intellectual ideas during the early part of the 20th century that were brought through and organized by the Ladies Annex members and approved of by the membership of the University Club. So to sum it up, what I'm trying to emphasize tonight is that the University Club did truly see itself as a place that where the ideas that people learned in other parts of the country, at the universities in particular, could bring that information to Portland and could nurture it and could have fellowship with each other and could continue to promote ideas, continue to promote the ideas that they learned in their college years, and to perhaps create a certain element of intellectualism. Another thing that was fascinating to me that I didn't put into the presentation was just yesterday I found the list of the periodicals that were ordered for the library, and the University Club library was at one point in time a pretty extraordinary library. And so one could go in there, and most of the things that required pretty expensive subscriptions per year, because at that point in time, these things were shipped from all over the country and all over the world. There was an incredible reading room at the University Club. And so they would read those periodicals and take turns doing that, and then get together and talk about what they read out of National Geographic, or whether it was whatever it was, Smithsonian or Harvard Review or whatever it was, and continue to stimulate their intellect in that way. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Okay.